On a first-class flight, a soldier returning home after years of service expected neither attention nor pity. But for the simple act of holding a first-class ticket, she was met with doubt, judgment, and the assumption that she did not belong. And then, a confrontation unfolded, not through harsh words, but through silence and dignity. What she didn't know was, at that very moment, the world was about to take notice. Leave a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And now, let's begin the story. The morning sky was a flawless mirror reflecting tranquility. But inside the bustling international airport, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The constant announcements over the loudspeakers, the rhythmic clatter of suitcase wheels against the polished marble floor, and the overlapping conversations of hurried travelers filled the space with an almost overwhelming energy. Emma Carter took a deep breath as she stepped past the security checkpoint. Her steel-gray eyes swept across the busy terminal, gliding over countless unfamiliar faces without stopping on any. She felt the air of freedom, the kind she hadn't had for months while serving in a distant land. On her shoulders, her military-issued backpack weighed heavily, not just with the items inside but with the exhaustion of years of service. Each step she took was steady, deliberate, as if even off the battlefield, her instincts remained sharp, her posture disciplined. She was still in uniform, not because she sought attention, but because it was a part of who she was. Emma had never been one for luxury. But today, she allowed herself a rare indulgence, a first-class ticket home. A brief moment of comfort before she had to fully transition into civilian life. She wasn't alone in the first-class lounge. As she moved toward the boarding area, her eyes landed on a woman seated on a plush leather chair. Her appearance effortlessly refined, her golden waves were styled to perfection, her entire demeanor radiating confidence and status. Madeline Hawthorne. From the first glance, Emma recognized the type. It wasn't about judging a book by its cover. She had seen enough people in the military to know that appearances could be deceiving. But she had also encountered enough Madelines in her life to know exactly who she was dealing with: wealthy, poised, exuding an air of superiority, and convinced that she belonged to a higher echelon of society. Draped in a beige designer coat, her polished heels crossed elegantly, Madeline's expensive handbag rested on the seat next to her, as if even it deserved a place in first class. Emma paid no mind. She just wanted to get to her seat, close her eyes for a moment before takeoff. When the boarding announcement for first-class passengers echoed through the terminal, Emma rose from her seat. Double-checking her ticket, she approached the counter, handing her boarding pass to the flight attendant, a young woman who offered her a warm smile before glancing at Emma's uniform. "Thank you for your service, Ms. Carter." Emma nodded. She didn't need the thanks. She had heard it too many times before, sometimes genuine, sometimes just obligatory. All she wanted was to board, go home, and hold her daughter in her arms. She walked down the aisle of the first-class cabin, scanning for her seat. When she stopped in front of her assigned row, she noticed something immediately. Her seat was occupied, not by a person, but by a designer handbag. Emma turned to the woman beside it. "Madeline." Her voice was calm, measured. "Excuse me, this is my seat." Madeline glanced up from her phone. Her cool gray eyes flickered over Emma, slowly taking in her uniform, her worn boots, her military-issued bag. Then, she arched a brow. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice dragging out the words with quiet skepticism. Emma's brows twitched slightly, irritation bubbling beneath her otherwise steady demeanor. She remained composed, pulled out her ticket, and held it up for Madeline to see. "Yes, I'm sure." Madeline exhaled, slow and deliberate, as if she were being inconvenienced by something unworthy of her time. But rather than moving her bag immediately, she tilted her head, eyeing Emma once more. "First class?" she mused, a small smirk playing at the corner of her lips. Emma's gaze remained unwavering. She had encountered people like this before, the ones who believed that only certain types of people belonged in certain places. "Yes," she said firmly, "and this is my seat." Madeline finally set her phone down, but instead of reaching for her bag, she crossed her arms over her chest, leaning slightly against her chair. "I just find it surprising." Emma clenched her jaw slightly. She knew exactly what Madeline was implying. A woman in uniform, sitting in first class? She had given over a decade of her life to serving her country. Yet people like Madeline still measured her worth by the clothes she wore and the way she carried herself. Other passengers in first class were now watching. Some stole glances but said nothing. Others averted their eyes, unwilling to engage. Emma could have escalated things. She could have called a flight attendant to resolve the issue. But instead, she took a slow breath and kept her tone level. "I don't need you to understand it," she said evenly. "I just need you to move your bag." The air between them grew thick with tension. Madeline still didn't move, but before she could say anything else, a new voice cut in from behind them. "Is there a problem?" A flight attendant approached, her gaze flicking between the two women. Emma glanced at the flight attendant before turning back to Madeline. The other woman's lips had pressed into a thin line, as if weighing whether or not she wanted to push this further. Finally, with a huff of annoyance, she picked up her handbag and placed it on her lap. But this was far from over. Emma sank into her seat, feeling the plush cushioning beneath her. But relaxation remained elusive. She cast a sidelong glance at Madeline, who maintained the same icy expression as if Emma had just ruined some grand plan of hers. Emma was no stranger to people like Madeline, those who believed the world operated in a structured hierarchy, where people like them were entitled to certain privileges, while people like Emma were not. Saying nothing more, Emma fastened her seatbelt and turned her gaze toward the window. The luxury aircraft glided slowly along the runway, preparing for takeoff. The city lights below gradually faded as they ascended into a deep, star-speckled sky. Madeline cleared her throat, unable to contain her irritation. "I'm actually quite curious," she said, her voice as sharp as a blade. "How exactly did you manage to get a first-class ticket?" Emma didn't turn, but her hands clenched slightly on her lap. She had thought this was over. But apparently, Madeline wasn't ready to let it go. "I bought it," Emma replied, her tone steady. Madeline let out a soft chuckle, but it was far from friendly. "Oh, did you now? No offense, of course. But I just assumed soldiers like you had designated seating. Perhaps somewhere in economy. Or maybe near the cargo hold?" Emma could hear the mockery laced in her words. She finally turned to face Madeline, meeting her gaze for the first time since boarding. "I served in the military for 12 years, she said slowly, "and I paid for this ticket myself. No special favors, no clerical error. I earned it." Madeline's lips curled ever so slightly, her eyes flicking over Emma's uniform. "How interesting. I wouldn't have thought people like you, well, could afford first class." The words cut like a knife. But Emma had heard them before, from different faces, in different places. People like Madeline believed that certain jobs were honorable, while others were merely necessary. "First class isn't a privilege reserved for a select few," Emma said simply, turning her gaze back to the window. "Anyone who can buy a ticket is free to sit here." Madeline wasn't ready to drop it. But the thing is, people expect a certain kind of person in this cabin. Business executives, investors, politicians. Surely you can understand why I was surprised to see a soldier here." Emma turned back to her, her eyes sharp as steel. "Do you think this is the first time I've encountered surprise like yours?" Madeline raised a brow, but before she could speak again, another voice interrupted. "This is interesting, but I think we've taken this conversation a bit too far." Both Emma and Madeline turned. A distinguished-looking man with neatly graying hair, a perfectly tailored suit, and an expensive watch on his wrist was watching them. Jonathan Whitmore, a name that carried weight in the business and philanthropic worlds. A successful entrepreneur and the owner of a renowned investment firm. Emma didn't recognize him, but clearly, Madeline did. Her expression flickered ever so slightly, as if realizing that someone of actual importance had been paying attention. "Excuse me, do you have an issue here?" Madeline asked, her tone softer but still laced with arrogance. Jonathan chuckled lightly. "Oh, not at all. I just find it strange that someone would be bothered by a veteran sitting in first class. After all, if anyone deserves a bit of comfort, it's them." Madeline parted her lips, seemingly searching for a retort, but then pressed them shut. Jonathan turned toward Emma, his smile genuine. "Thank you for your service, Ms. Carter. I overheard the conversation, and I must say, the way you handled it was commendable." Emma simply nodded. She didn't need anyone to defend her, but she appreciated the support from a stranger. Madeline said nothing more, merely folding her arms, her expression darkening. The flight attendant arrived with the beverage cart. Emma exhaled, grounding herself back in reality, focusing on what truly mattered: going home, seeing her daughter, and leaving behind the judgmental stares of people like Madeline. But what she didn't realize was that this moment was only the beginning. The flight was far from over, and an unexpected turn was waiting for her. The plane continued its journey, gliding through moonlit clouds. In the first-class cabin, the atmosphere still carried a hint of tension, even though on the surface, everything seemed to have settled. Emma closed her eyes, trying to enjoy a moment of peace before the flight landed. But she knew all too well, people like Madeline never let things go so easily. Every now and then, Emma could feel Madeline's gaze flicking toward her from the corner of her eye. It wasn't just a passing glance, it was a measured, scrutinizing look, laced with irritation. A part of Emma wanted to turn to her and ask outright why she was so obsessed with the fact that she was sitting here. But after years in the military, she had learned a valuable lesson: not every battle was worth fighting. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence beside her. "Can you believe this?" Madeline said, though she wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. It was clear she wanted everyone around her to hear. These days, just about anyone can get into first class, whether they belong here or not. Emma didn't react immediately, but Jonathan, who had been quietly observing, tilted his head slightly, his sharp gaze locking onto Madeline. "Lucky for us, isn't it?" he said, his voice calm but tinged with irony. "Because if we judged people solely by appearances, the world would be a much smaller place." Madeline pressed her lips together, clearly not expecting to be challenged. Emma glanced at Jonathan, for the first time feeling a sense of curiosity about the man. Not everyone had the confidence to stand up to someone like Madeline, especially people in powerful positions like him. A few rows behind them, a young woman named Sophia, likely in her early 20s, sat quietly with her phone in her hands. She had witnessed the entire exchange from the beginning. Every word Madeline had uttered, every calm response from Emma. And Sophia knew, this was a story worth telling. She lifted her phone discreetly and pressed record. Not to cause trouble, but because she believed what was happening needed to be documented. As the plane landed and passengers began to disembark, Sophia quickly scrolled through the video. Just as she expected, it wasn't just a petty argument between two strangers. It was proof that bias and prejudice still existed. She hesitated for a moment, then tapped upload. Within hours, the real storm had begun. As Emma stepped out of the airport, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The flight had been far from relaxing, but at least it was over. She inhaled deeply, savoring the familiar air of home. A taxi picked her up, and for the first time in months, she truly felt like she was back where she belonged. But Emma had no idea that, at that very moment, her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. On social media, Sophia's video had begun spreading at an unstoppable pace. Underneath the 3-minute clip, thousands of comments flooded in. "That blonde woman is absolutely rude. Who does she think she is? I can't believe people still act like this in 2024. A soldier deserves more respect than that. Thank you for sharing this. I hope Emma knows she's not alone." The hashtag #FirstClassForAll quickly became the top trending topic on Twitter and TikTok. Major news outlets picked up the story, running headlines like, "Soldier humiliated in first class, internet outraged. First class passenger or first class privilege?" The debate that's shaking social media. Meanwhile, Madeline remained blissfully unaware, starting her morning as usual. But it didn't take long before her phone began buzzing nonstop. Texts, calls, emails, all centered around one viral video. And the worst part? People had identified her. One particular tweet spread like wildfire. "I know this woman. Her name is Madeline Hawthorne, marketing director at a major company. If I were her boss, I'd seriously reconsider keeping someone like that on the team." It didn't take long for internet detectives to dig up her identity. And within a single morning, she went from a respected executive to one of the most hated figures online. Meanwhile, Jonathan was also quick to realize just how much this story had blown up. Sitting in his office, he watched the news coverage when his phone rang. One of his assistants spoke urgently. "Sir, have you seen the video? It's gaining massive attention." Jonathan smiled slightly. "I suppose justice has a way of working itself out." But he wasn't just here to watch. Jonathan had realized something important. Emma wasn't just a soldier. She was a symbol of patience, resilience, and dignity. And he knew she was capable of something much bigger. Without hesitation, Jonathan picked up the phone and made a call. "Can you find a way to get in touch with Emma Carter?" "Yes, sir, but may I ask why?" Jonathan chuckled lightly. "Because I think we have an opportunity to turn this story into something truly meaningful." Emma opened her eyes as the first rays of sunlight slipped through the window. A rare sense of serenity washed over her as she realized she was home. No more sterile white walls of the barracks. No more roaring fighter jets tearing through the sky. For the first time in months, she woke up without the weight of missions, tactical plans, or the looming threat of ambushes. She rolled over and reached for her phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with hundreds of unread notifications. Emma frowned. Who would be messaging her this much? She tapped on the first message from an old military comrade. Emma, have you seen the news? You're famous. Her brows furrowed as she clicked on the attached link. A video immediately played. It was her. On the plane. Madeline's voice came through loud and clear, laced with condescension. I just find it surprising. A woman like you, sitting here? Emma blinked, a tight knot forming in her stomach. The clip ended with her composed reaction, followed by an overwhelming flood of outraged comments. Hashtag first class for all, a hashtag she had never seen before, was now trending at the top. She quickly opened Twitter, and what she saw stunned her. Thousands of people were talking about her. About the incident on the plane. About the discrimination she had faced. Some praised her composure. Emma Carter is a true soldier, not just on the battlefield, but in the way she handled this situation. She belongs in first class more than anyone else. She fought for this country. But not everyone was on her side. Why does everything have to be a big deal? That woman was just curious. This wasn't discrimination, so we're not allowed to ask questions anymore? Emma set her phone down, her thoughts swirling. She had never wanted to be the center of any public debate. All she wanted was to come home, see her daughter, and start fresh after leaving the military. But clearly, the world wasn't going to let her fade quietly into the background. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Emma Carter speaking. Good morning, Ms. Carter. A deep, composed voice said. This is Jonathan Whitmore. I believe we met on the flight yesterday. Emma fell silent for a moment. Jonathan Whitmore, the name rang a bell. And then it clicked. He was the man who had spoken up for her on the plane. I remember you, she said cautiously. Why are you calling me? I assume you've seen the video making its rounds online. Emma exhaled. Yes, just now. So have I, and I believe this situation presents an opportunity for you. Her eyes narrowed. What kind of opportunity? Would you be willing to meet in person? Jonathan asked. I have a proposal I think you might find interesting. Emma stepped into a quiet cafe in the heart of the city, where Jonathan had asked to meet. He was already there, seated near a window, composed and confident. Ms. Carter, he greeted as she approached. Thank you for taking the time. Emma sat down, studying him with sharp eyes. I don't have much time, so let's get straight to the point. Jonathan smiled, as if expecting that response. I run a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans transition into civilian life. We assist with employment, psychological support, and even provide financial resources for those looking to start their own businesses. Emma nodded, though she still wasn't sure what that had to do with her. And I believe you would be the perfect representative for this program. Jonathan continued. The video of you is spreading at an incredible rate. People are listening to you. This is an opportunity for you to use your voice for something bigger. Emma frowned. What exactly are you asking me to do? Become some sort of symbol? Jonathan chuckled. No, not at all. I'm asking you to be a mentor, a leader. You have first-hand experience. You know the struggles veterans face when they return home. You can help them in ways someone like me never could. Emma remained silent, mulling over his words. She had never seen herself as an influencer. But Jonathan was right. She knew what people like her went through. The isolation, the feeling of not belonging, the sleepless nights haunted by memories of war. But was she ready to step into the public eye? You seem to think I enjoy talking to crowds, she said, her tone light but guarded. Jonathan tilted his head slightly. I think you have the ability to change lives. Emma let out a small chuckle, shaking her head. I'll think about it. Jonathan smiled. Good. I'll send you some information about the program. If you decide to take part, give me a call. Emma stood and shook his hand. His grip was firm, steady, genuine. As she stepped out of the cafe, the crisp morning breeze ruffled her hair. She had come home from war believing she only needed a normal job, a quiet life. But now, she found herself at a crossroads she had never anticipated. Emma walked slowly along the brick-paved street, her mind weighed down by thoughts. Her meeting with Jonathan had stirred something inside her, a door opening to an entirely different path. One she had never considered before. In the military, she had been accustomed to command, to making decisions under pressure, to knowing exactly what needed to be done. But here, in civilian life, everything seemed far more complicated. There were no orders to follow, no clear mission, no comrades by her side to move forward together. She stopped in front of a small cafe, one she used to visit before she enlisted. Memories flooded back. The last time she sat there was the day she left home. When her daughter, Lily, was only 5 years old. Now, Lily was 8, and she was the most important thing. Emma needed stability. She needed time to make up for the years she had missed with her daughter. She had no desire to become a symbol on social media or a figure in the public eye. But as she unlocked her phone, a flood of unread messages and emails reminded her that her story was still spreading like wildfire. As she stepped into the house, Lily ran toward her, wrapping her small arms tightly around her waist. Emma lifted her daughter up, holding her close, inhaling the familiar scent she had longed for. "Mom, are you staying home for a long time?" Lily asked, eyes bright with hope. Emma smiled. "I'll do my best." But deep down, she knew she still hadn't quite found her place in this world. The next day, she received a call from a major television network. "Ms. Carter, we'd like to invite you for an interview regarding the incident on your flight. The public is very interested in your story." Emma hesitated. She had never liked public attention. But refusing meant letting others control the narrative. A few hours later, she called back and agreed. The following day, Emma stepped into a grand studio. Lights glaring overhead, the host greeted her warmly. But there was a sharpness in their gaze, as if they were analyzing her every move. Emma Carter, former soldier, the woman whose story about discrimination in first class has taken the internet by storm. "Can you share your thoughts on what happened?" Emma took a deep breath, aware that millions of people were watching. "I never expected any of this to happen," she said slowly. "I was just trying to get home after years of serving in the military." The host nodded. "But it seems this incident has sparked a larger conversation about discrimination. About who deserves to be in first class. What are your thoughts on that?" Emma paused for a moment before answering. "I believe everyone deserves a fair chance," she said. "No one should be judged simply because they don't fit someone else's idea of who belongs where. I'm not a CEO or a politician. I'm a soldier, and I worked hard for that ticket. And I believe anyone, regardless of their background, can do the same." The interview lasted over 30 minutes. When it ended, Emma let out a quiet sigh of relief. But she had no idea that yet another media storm was brewing. Meanwhile, Madeline, the woman at the center of the controversy, could no longer hide from the backlash. She was fired from her company, faced endless criticism online, and even saw longtime clients sever ties with her. Eventually, she had no choice but to speak out. In an interview, Madeline appeared noticeably worn out, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman she had been on that flight. "I never meant any harm," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. I never thought it would go this far." But the public wasn't easily swayed. Social media erupted with reactions. "She's only apologizing because she got caught, not because she's actually sorry. Welcome to the real world, Madeline, where arrogance has consequences." Emma scrolled through the comments with a strange mix of emotions. A part of her believed Madeline deserved what was happening. But another part, she knew what it felt like to have the world turn against you. In the end, she decided to do something no one expected. She posted a message online. "I never wanted Madeline to lose her job or be personally attacked. What I wanted was for us to reflect on how we treat each other. No matter our place in society, we can learn from our mistakes, but only if we truly want to change." Her words immediately gained traction. The conversation began to shift. Instead of just condemning Madeline, people started discussing forgiveness, growth, and what it means to truly learn from one's actions. Emma hadn't anticipated it, but that moment changed everything. A few weeks later, she received another call from Jonathan. "Have you given any more thought to my offer?" Emma looked out the window, watching the sky glow with the hues of a setting sun. "I think I'm ready." Jonathan smiled through the phone. "Excellent. We have a lot of work to do." And so, Emma stepped into a new chapter of her life, no longer a soldier on the battlefield, but a fighter for fairness, for opportunity, and for those who had no voice. Her story was never just about a seat in first class. It was about a chance that everyone deserves.